So we will move on now to the lightning. Right, thank you very much for that talk of the workshop. We are running a little bit late, and I would like to try to keep time. So there are a few great questions in the chat, and we will also, you're welcome to answer them in the chat. We'll also post those in Slack, and so we encourage people to continue the discussion conversation.
Can you hear me?
Yep, now I can hear you.
Okay. Thanks, Kyle. So now it's time for lightning talks. Right now it's 9:20 a.m. and we'll have a break at 9:50. So we'll have 30 minutes for 4 lightning speakers. So we have Housen Chu, Siyan Ma, Humphrey Vincent, and Lin Meng. So I'm sorry. Let me share the presentation. Okay, so our first lightning speaker is Housen Chu from Lawrence Berkeley Lab. So Housen, please take this away.
Sure. Should I share my screen or you're running it?
I'm running it.
Okay. I still waiting to see the screen. So morning or good afternoon, everyone. Depends on where you're from. I'm Housen Chu from Lawrence Berkeley Lab. Still haven't seen my screen yet.
We don't see the slides yet.
Or I can share my.
Yeah, Housen, why don't you share for this one and then we can share for the rest of them?
Sure. Okay, assuming you can see my screen, correct and right. So just quickly, I'm going to talk very briefly about a new framework we've been testing in the last couple of months. So we're investigating a footprint of informed decomposition approach for deriving the flux response function. So I want to acknowledge my collaborators, especially Pedro Oikawa and Tommy Fenster. And some of this work is inspired by the conversation we have in the last couple of months. So this is just some background. Some of you might aware we have a footprint paper early this year. Try to look into the footprint across the merit flux site to see how well the flux tower represent that. And one thing we learned that is not all the flux tower are homogeneous. So there are some heterogeneity, there are some patchiness, and depends on the ecosystem we work, and they are interesting. But also there are some challenging about this, right? So look at the left-hand side. We know about the temporal dynamic of the footprint, the flux data for sure. But often we pretend we don't know that there's a spatial component of this data set. So there are some spatial aspect, depends on the ecosystem we're working with. And in some of the side, there are some heterogeneity within the footprint. So it might become a challenge about interpreting your flux data. But also it could be an opportunity, right? Can we somehow harvest this rich information about this spatial pattern and come up with idea about the response function for each of the length cover type we're interested in, and eventually, essentially, trying to come up with what does the flux look like for each of these length cover component. That might be interesting. So that drive our this study. So the core, I won't go into detail. So we developed a Bayesian hierarchical modeling approach and try to use a footprint. And this, I only talk about ET component here, but we test for other flux variable too. And this is Payman-Monteith's equation. This is a core of everything. And this is very familiar to all of the audience here. And we also incorporate a VPD effect into the surface conductance. The only thing difference here is instead of just using one set of parameter to train that and a parameter against the flux data, we're using a set of parameters. So we're assuming there are different land cover type within the footprint, and each of them be weighted by the footprint and combined. And that's the idea behind this, okay? And for the testing, we're using, I'm showing 3 sites here from the less relative homogeneous, still heterogeneous site, conquer grassland. This is a grassland with a patch of the seasonal wetland. And the second one is we're using this high level 22-meter tower. And you're seeing the patch of the winter wheat compared to prairie. They have a different seasonality. And the last one is a very complex case, Eden Landing. It's a tidal wetland. You can see patchiness of the vegetated area and the mud flood within the footprint. So we want to test, can we separate the response function for this different land cover type within a footprint? So these are the result of the response function. And again, the three side. I'm showing the LE against the potential LE. So this is just based on payment multiplication and assuming the conductance go to infinity and give you an idea. So we are focusing only on the summertime here and where the contrast should be very clear here. So be able to separate out the response function of this grassland. You can see a higher ET from the when you see the seasonal wetland within the grass. And be able to separate out the prairie and the winter wheat in the late summer season when the winter wheat got harvested, everything got shut down. And challenging, but we'll be able to separate out the response function from the Eden Landing, the vegetated area, the open water. The take home here is, I think the method worked, but depends on the degree of the heterogeneity, right? So you have a very heterogeneity case like Eden Landing. So the shaded area is uncertainty level, it becomes larger and larger. So we might be able to see a difference, but with a very large uncertainty. And last is, with this response function, I was trying to test about, can we separate this out, try to come up with a time series of the land cover ET for different land cover type. And this is just an example from the ARM. And I'll be able to show this is a daily data. The gray is the original observer data. And the blue one and the green one are the model data based on our approach, showing this is from the prairie, this is from the winter wheat, and after the harvest, you can see the winter wheat got a lower ET after all in the late growing season. So the take home here is, I think this method is kind of robust, but it also depends on the degree of heterogeneity of the site, and also the land cover composition, and of course the footprint variation. So for some site, it might be challenging to separate this out, but this provides a new opportunity for us to look at the flux data in a spatial way. And there are also room to improve to better constrain the derivation of the response function in the future. And that's it for me. I hope I have time for question.
Oh, Kun, you're still muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Housen. So I think we need to move on to the next speaker. So if you have any question, please type in the chat, your question in the chat or in the Slack channel. So next up is Siyan Ma. Siyan, do you want to share your screen here.
Yeah,
or
I can share my. Can you share my screen, or I can share from my side?
Okay, go ahead.
Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Hello everyone. I'm glad to be here to share the recent studies on the comparison between the evapotranspiration and water use efficiency in dryland and wetland in California. So this is really like site-based study. This study included 4 ecosystems in California. two is on the foothill of the Sierra Nevada mountains, and another two side wetland is in the San Juan Key Sacramento River data area. So we wonder what's different if we set up so extreme conditions, what's different between them. So you see, first, as we expected that wetlands have a higher evapotranspiration than the drylands. But if we look at the partitioned transpiration, then it's not maybe the issue. But as just now, Housen mentioned that because the wetland has a very heterogeneous landscape, so the transpiration rate is really depends on the vegetation coverage. So that's what we see, that if we use the annual budget to calculate the water use efficiency, then the water use efficiency of the dryland is actually higher than the wetland, if the wetland covered pretty well with the wetland vegetation. So what's going on in the within the seasons? So we compare these two type of landscape by using the daytime average of GPP and the transpiration and the partitioned transpiration. So what we see that you know, the California is really have a dry summers, but the dryland responds to that climate pattern. So the most active recent growing season is in the spring. But in the dryland, in the wetland, the water is not an issue. I mean, precipitation is not a constraint factor. Another thing we notice here is if we compare the timing of the peaks of GPP and evaporation or transpiration, then there's a time lag at the dryland, but it's coupled pretty well between the photosynthesis and transpiration at the wetland because of no significant water issue, water stress. Then we compare, so that's really drive us to really want to know what's different between these two type of ecosystems. So if we compare the VPD at the two sides, then the VPD at the wetland is lower than those at the dryland. And the dryland, like the VPD is seems not is pretty high, already influenced the stomatal conductance decreased significantly. So that's why we see the seasonal pattern is like the wet spring is more active at the dryland. So with that question, we wonder, so what's going on? What the factor driving the seasonal water use efficiency dynamic? Then we calculate kind of really roughly analysis, calculate the sensitivity or the slope of the linear regression between the pairs, photosynthesis versus VPD, or transpiration versus VPD within every 15 days. So the pattern you'll see here that what we got is impression will be the photosynthesis are more sensitive to the water stress, and the two type of ecosystem gives us a little bit consistent at this point, but the dryland really responds to the water stress in the dry summer. So we haven't really got finished this study, but because the photosynthesis is also related or determined by the species features, traits. So maybe the next future, we will doing that analysis. Thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you very much for your lightning talk. That was wonderful. Please, everybody, include questions in the chat or Slack.
So the last speaker, we have Lin Meng. So yeah, if you have your slide, please share with you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lin. I'm a postdoc at Berkeley Lab working at the Untitled project. I study forest atmospheric exchange of carbon and water using flux data and land surface temperature models. And today I'm going to talk about our work on water constraint of Amazon forest during the drought. The motivation is that we are trying to understand whether the transpiration of tropical evergreen forest is light limited or water limited in order to improve the model prediction of Amazon forest in response to a more extreme climate. There's large spatial variation of this seasonal constraint of water and light availability in Amazon basin. But in central Amazon, our K34 study site, which is on a plateau, forests remain green all year round, even during the dry season. They are well adapted to the cycle of wet and dry seasons. The soil water is recharged during the wet season to support dry season transpiration. So there is very little evidence of water stress of evergreen forest in central Amazon. However, it's not clear whether the forest with abundant water will become water limited under extreme drought conditions. So this 2015-16 annual drought provide us a great opportunity to look at these questions. During this drought, we have extreme dry soil shown at this blue line, and we have a very high radiation temperature and VPD. And we also have observation on sap velocity, which is a good indicator of plant water status. You can see there's a rapid decline in sap velocity during the September-October in 2015. The challenge of understanding drought impact on transpiration in Amazon is that we don't have good field data normally. It's very logistic challenging to collect data in Amazon. And many of this data don't cover the extreme drought period. But our project managed to install these sensors and collect this very valuable field data, which enable us to answer the questions. Whether transpiration from rainforest in the central Amazon was constrained by low soil moisture during the extreme drought. So we look at the covariations of sap velocity with soil water content and net radiation for 4 periods: late dry season 2015 and drought in 2015, and wet and early dry season in 2016. And each period is 2 weeks. And in this figure, the blue bar represents the partial correlation coefficient between sap velocity and soil moisture, which are significant and positive during the late dry and drought in 2015, while the coefficient between sap velocity and net radiation, shown by the orange bars, are not significant during the drought. But they become significant during the wet season and early dry season in 2016. This indicates a strong soil moisture control during drought and a dominant light control during wet season. And we did this for 4 tree species and found very consistent patterns. To me, this is very exciting because there is show a very clear shift from water to light limitation. This is the first time we're able to see this in central Amazon from field data during this extreme dry conditions. Next, we want to identify when did this shift happens. So we're using a moving window approach to conduct partial correlation analysis for every 10 days and look at how this coefficient change during the whole period. This blue and orange bar indicate a significant coefficient and gray bar indicate a non-significant coefficient. So we can see the date when water stress start to occur is late August to early September in 2015. And this soil moisture control continued to occur throughout the whole September and then become intermittent and disappear after several rainfall events. And during the strong water control period, the light control disappeared. We also found the period with strong water control was also the period when soil water content start to decrease, as shown in this purple line, and reach its minimum in early October. Based on these findings, we identify soil moisture threshold. This threshold is the soil moisture during the first period when we start to see this consistent and lasting water control. Threshold ranges from 0.31 to 0.33 across tree species. This study suggests a progressively critical role of soil moisture and a drier future. This could happen in Amazon, in Central Amazon, and any other places that we previously thought have plenty of water. This soil moisture threshold provides us a critical benchmark to test and improve models for a future land atmosphere exchange in Amazon. With that, I would like to acknowledge my team, collaborators, and funding source. Thank you.
Thank you, Lin. So yeah, this wraps up the first part of lightning talks. Thank you all, and so we hope we can finish up this by noon. So yeah, please mindful lightning speaker. So I'll hand it over to our first speaker, Ge-sun. So are you ready for lightning talk?
Yeah, let me share my screen.
Yeah, I think you can.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna move this. Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of the work at the US Forest Service. First, definitely I would like to acknowledge my co-authors and collaborators, NC State, Dr. John King, America. Also, you probably all know Ask for Nomad. We have been working for a long time in North Carolina. The DOMAC, also some people in Germany. Recently, we are collaborating, trying to look at the model. So first is, who cares about the ET? I think different people, you have different perceptions, really. For hydrologists, we measure flow, but rarely measure in evapotranspiration. For climatologists, we care about the energy balance, right? Latent heat. For ecologists, this morning we talked a lot about this partitioning, care about carbon. For water managers, the crop irrigation community, they care about ET because what ET kind of a loss. So we need to quantify that. Also, for ecological restoration, because I do a lot of that, a lot of confusion, they come from the trade-offs between evapotranspiration and infiltration. So basically, ET is, for me, kind of a very central to a lot of questions. For hydrological modeling, like myself as a hydrologist, it's very common practice, right? From PET to actual ET. But from this process, very difficult because there are so many processes involved. Like in forest, we need the age in the leaf area index, height, hydraulics, soil water content, water potential. How do we incorporate that into the model? There are simple models, there are complex models, like this FIO called the reference ET method. Basically, you calculate this reference Pengman-Matisse equation, then you multiply a coefficient called curve coefficient, you get actual ET. I think the reason that they want to standardize this because PET concept is a very ambiguous concept. There are so many models there. If you use a different model, you get a different answer for your PET. So we have been looking, trying to take advantage of this anti-flax community, this FlaxNet, AmeriFlax, trying to get the KC really for different ecosystem. So we published a paper. You can see this chart, right, for KC. You can see different ecosystems. They have different KC. Also, they vary a lot, over time. So it's not a constant. And actually, there are not a lot of published literature on this, except the irrigation community, because they have this lattimeter. They can measure it. They can, quantify this, very accurately. So when we look at these KC values for the global, FlaxNet, we found some interesting, this KC, even forests, they were less than 1. Basically, the forest use less water than irrigated grass. But sometimes some ecosystems, they were higher than this PET. So in that case, if your model you set up with the potential ET as your max of ET, then your model may be wrong. That's how the eddy covariance data can be useful. And also we trying to model this KC as a function of latitude, precipitation, and leaf area index. They were not perfect, but they were useful for global application. We also developed some model we call the Vase model, trying to link water, carbon, and biodiversity. You may ask, how come biodiversity related to evapotranspiration? Actually, there are many literature for global scale, for large region scale, they related very well. Ecologists, they link potential ET to tree richness or bird richness. So they're all linked. So we're trying to develop a monthly model, trying to link all those 3 components. So this is the structure of the model. You can see, we developed this very simple model, but we're trying to take advantage of anti-flax data, relate to evapotranspiration, to PET, P, precipitation, leaf area index, and soil moisture. Soil moisture content is modeled by a soil water balance model. So we link GPP with ET as a linear function. This morning we talked a lot about the separation of E and T, probably very useful to improve our model. And so for that ET, when we published the paper in a simple model, but we can predict evapotranspiration based on 3 factors: leaf area index, potential ET, also the months of precipitation. So you can have a very tight prediction. So we incorporate this into our model. We can simulate the water balance for the entire US over 88,000 watersheds. So that kind of scale we simulate. And here is this example of the map. We have evapotranspiration, water yield, and also the GPP on watershed scale. We also tested this model just recently in the last few months in Germany. trying to quantify the GPP for entire Germany, and we tested the model, this Ediflex data for ET. Some sites are doing pretty well, even this global ET model. Also, we checked with also the GPP numbers. They were reasonably good, but we found some issues like winter measurement of ET. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Edson. So next up is Jiaming Wen. So Jiaming, if you're ready to share your screen, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jiaming Wen from Cornell University. Today, I'd like to introduce our recent work of resolving the continuous diurnal cycle of high-resolution ecostress ET and LST. So today, there are actually a bunch of ET data sets. For example, the measurements from anti-covariance flux towers or estimates based on remote sensing images. However, all of them have limitations. For example, the flux tower is the point measurements with limited footprint size and uneven global spatial distribution. And the remote sensing based estimate, although with global coverage, are usually in a coarse spatial resolution or coarse temporal resolution without resolving the diurnal variation. And then EcoStress, launched in June 2018, is really a game changer for ET monitoring in that it provides ET estimates at very high spatial resolution and pretty frequent revisit time. And also it's worth mentioning is that it samples the diurnal cycle because the satellite passes over the same spot at different time of day, thus providing very important diurnal information. But this special characteristics also make it difficult to directly compare the two overpasses acquired at different time of day. So to overcome this issue, in our study, we try to construct the diurnal cycle of ecostress LST and ET. So we first used the geostationary LST from GOES to construct the diurnal cycle of LST in ecostress using a DTC model, which characterized the diurnal shape of LST from with several parameters. And then with the diurnal LST constructed, we use that as the input for PT-JPL ET model to estimate the diurnal ET at 70-meter resolution. So we tested our framework in this region in Seviata grassland in New Mexico with one Ameriflex site in the center. The majority of the region is covered by shrublands and grasslands with some crops and the wetlands in the northwest and some forests in the east. We tested our framework in 3 time windows with distinctive phenological stages. So here shows the results. So we first compared our results, constructed data sets with original ecostress observations using leave-one-out cross-validation approach. So you can see that our framework can reasonably reproduce the fine spatial pattern in the native ecostress observations with minimal residues for both as LST and the ET. And then furthermore, this consistency holds for all the 3 phenological stages and for both LST and the ET. And next, we compared our constructed time series with independent flux tower measurements, and here shows the LST comparison. And you can see that the constructed LST time series showed striking agreement in diurnal variations with tower LST across all the 3 phenological stages, except here when there was a huge storm which basically disturbed the diurnal shape of LST. And next is the ET comparison. So first of all, actually we noticed there was an overestimation in the original ecostress ET compared to tower ET. So we first modified one of the constraint factors for soil moisture by adding a factor of 0.5. Then with that modified, our constructed ET time series showed general agreement with tower ET but to a lesser extent compared to LST. That was mainly because ET is a flux variable that is highly dynamic during the diurnal course and may contain more measurement noise compared to LST. But you can still see that our constructed ET can greatly capture the ET surge after the rain events. So next step, we would like to test and apply our framework to more regions with broader range of climates and the biome types. And eventually we would like to generate a diurnally resolved 70-meter global operational LST in the ET products. That's all, and thanks for listening, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Jiaming. And yeah, we'll only accept questions in the chat or Slacks. So yeah, please go ahead and leave your questions. So next up is Orlando Ramirez. So Orlando, are you ready for your talk?
Yes, I am ready.
Yeah, you may share your screen if you'd like to.
Yeah, let me wait a second to share my screen.
Sure.
Where is it? Here. Okay. You can see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, hello everyone. Good morning. Today I want to talk about partitioning evapotranspiration with eddy covariance measurement and remote sensing data. We are developing a new method that for partitioning evapotranspiration using that data from remote sensing local meteorological data. So, okay, here. Sorry. Okay. The objective of this method is to know better the croplands about the productive waters versus non-productive water use. We are defining the productive water use as transpiration, represented in the green arrow in this picture, and non-productive water use are represented by the evaporation. That's mean this is representing the red arrow in this picture. So to test this method, we use data from the experiment that was deployed in northern Mexico in the state of Sonora. In this place, we have instrumented with eddy covariance systems to measure the evapotranspirations. So also we installed the temperature and relative humidity sensor and net radiometers to be able to calculate the independently evaporation and transpiration using the maximum entropy production method proposed by White and Brass. So this approach weighs on this equation is appear here. So actually evapotranspiration is product of the reference evapotranspiration obtained from meteorological data variables using the Pellman-Monteith equations and crop coefficients. The crop coefficients are represented in this black line. This curve describes the state development of the crops through the season. So basically, this crop coefficient is made up by two sub-coefficients. It is KCB and KE. One represents transpiration. This is a KCB. This represents transpiration. Transpiration is called basal crop coefficient, and KE represents the soil evaporation. So the sum of those two make the crop coefficients, the global crop coefficient. The basal crop coefficients represent the transpiration that can be obtained from the vegetation data using satellite image. For example, we get the NDVI values. That values can be scaled to KCB values. So this is the method. We use 3 inputs on Sentinel satellite, meteorological data, and Landsat 7 and 8. So to use the Sentinel-2 to get the vegetation indices, using to calculate the KCB. We get the KCB or instantaneous KCB measured by every 5 days and 10 meters spatial resolutions. This is based on the satellite image that we later interpolate, consider these smoothing curves from represent the increasing of the vegetation during the agricultural cycles. So here, then we use the reference ET from local meteorological data, and using those two to get the transpiration. That means KCB times ET, reference ET, we get the transpiration. So we use a Landsat to derive the ET from metric algorithm at 30 meters and every 16 days. So to back calculate the crop coefficients using the reference ET. And then in the same way we interpolate the KCB, we now interpolate the KC values to obtain the daily time series. We again use the reference evapotranspirations to calculate the actual ET time daily scale. In this picture, in this image, sorry, it shows us the performance on these different evapotranspiration and transpiration values from different methods. The first one is the maximum entropy production, are represented in the green line. The PETV is a partition evapotranspiration through vegetation index. It are represented in the red line, and metric is represented by the blue lines. In the purple line represented eddy covariance measurement. Here are the behavior of the transpiration versus transpiration from MET and PETV. The green line is transpiration from MET, and the red dashed line is for the PETV. So the next one is what is the behavior of the evaporation calculated by MET, or maximum entropy production, and PETV. Here, from the PETV comparison with the MET method, they are little discrepancies. We believe that the discrepancies we have observed is due to the difference of the resolution. So while the MET calculated evaporation and transpiration is at the very small resolution, a point scale, the measurement of the from PETV transpiration is integrated for the 10 by 10 meters of pixel. So where is the reason of the heterogeneity of the transpiration calculation? So here, these results are the scalables. If we have an image for high resolution image, you can get a better transpiration data at high resolution. So here is the same median and mean for both cases. This is an image for drone, and then it's for Sentinel-2. So the transpiration are the same rate in the both. Summarizing, the resolution does not affect the distribution transpiration, but I affect the soil evaporation. This is due to the spatial resolution. So thank you. It's all for me. Thank you for your time and patience.
Thank you, Orlando. Okay, so next up is Davi Melo. So Davi, if you're ready, you can share your screen and let's go ahead.
Yeah, just a second. Let me share it. Trying to figure out how to. Okay. Can you see that the screen?
Yes, but your I'm sorry. Slideshow screen, so not your.
Okay, so sorry. Let's see.
Full screen.
Stop share. I think this is the right one.
Yes.
Okay. Well, hello everyone. Thanks so much for this opportunity to share this study. This study is actually recently published in WRR. I'm one of the authors. Actually, we had a lot of contributions. Just to I could not mention the contribution of the other co-authors, so I'd like to acknowledge and also thanks for the contribution. One of them is here, I guess, Josh Fisher. This study had the following motivation. So we started to look at the literature, and what we found was that there are a lot of remote sensing ET models, but they are often validated or evaluated using data from flux towers from other continents, such as North America, Europe, and some towers across Asia. But there were a few studies that looked at the performance of those AT models across South America. So here in this figure, what I show here, these red stars are the flux towers we used in this study, as in opposite to the other studies that used. There are some reference here that you can see where these studies, where the towers used in these studies are located. So only a really low number of towers using those previous studies were in South America, and that's why we thought it would be nice to look at these models and how they perform in South America. So basically, we used meteorological data from 25 flux towers, and here in this figure you can see their locations. They are spread across several climates, biomes, and ecoregions in South America. We used some remote sensing data such as VI, LI, FPAR, and VOD. And we look at 4 remote sensing models, 2 based on the Priestley-Taylor equation, GLIM and PT-JPL, and other 2 models based on the Penman-Monteith equation, which are Penman-Monteith mode, which actually the model that produced the mode 16 product, and the model by Nagler and others, which we called PMVI, because it's based on one of the vegetation index that we use, in this case, EVI. We used some model evaluation metrics that are commonly adopted in this type of evaluation. So R-squared, RNC, percent bias, concordance correlation coefficient, and the slope and intercept of the regression line. Some results, just to give you a big an idea of what we found. So in general, the models, they agree well with the flux tower data. In this right figure, I showed some how the observations compared to the simulated data, the simulations. Usually we found a pretty good match. In some other cases, not all models compared well with the observations. But in terms of metrics, here's just a summary of the results. We also analyzed how each model compared to the individual towers, which is what we show here in the right figure. And also we grouped these towers according to their where they are located in terms of biomes, land use, and climate. So in general, we didn't find a single model that overperformed all the others for all climates or all land uses and so on. So usually what we found is that some models, they run better for specific conditions, while other models, they work better for other conditions. But what we noticed that it was pretty common is that most models, they don't work better. They don't look good when we consider the semi-arid regions, such as the BSK climate. Usually we can see that the statistics, they don't look as good as the other, what we found for the other climates. In terms of individual metrics, we can see that there's values all across the place. So we didn't find a trend, significant trend in terms of which model works better for everywhere. But as you can see here on the right side, usually we had RMSE ranging between 0.5 and 1.5 millimeters per day. And R squared usually go for most models from 0.5 up to 0.9, except for the PMVI, which presented the wider, greater range in terms of performance. The other models, they had these results usually confined to these ranges. So some final remarks. Usually we can see that models can reasonably represent over South America, despite some difference between models. For instance, we found higher R2 in the case of the PT models, whereas bias was lower for PM models. We also noticed that model skills, they are often unrelated to land cover type. And as I said before, there's not a single model that works best for all environments, but usually wet environments, they produced better results when we compare to arid environments. And also the study showed the need of expanding the FluxTown network, because most of the data we use, they are not available in FluxNet or Merflux database. So we had this huge amount of effort to get in touch with PIs and make those data available so we could run this evaluation. So that's what I wanted to share. Thank you so much, and I'll be taking any questions in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Davi. So we have our last speaker, so Adam Stapleton. So Adam, if you're ready to share your screen, please go ahead.
Yes. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for having me, folks, and good afternoon, and well done to all the other speakers. My name is Adam Stapleton. I am a PhD student at ML Labs, which is a doctoral training center based in Dublin, looking at machine learning. And I'll be presenting on a collaborative piece of work with Dr. Elke Eickelman and Dr. Mark Rowntree. So just a bit of background on the work. We're looking at evapotranspiration partitioning in 4 freshwater marsh wetland sites in Northern California, listed there. And we're using a novel ML-based partitioning method introduced by Dr. Eickelman. The core idea of the method is to train a neural network to predict water flux at nighttime. And then the hypothesis is that the model will learn to predict evaporation only. We then validate on other periods where we can assume that transpiration is negligible, namely the initial flooding period of each of the wetlands and the winter periods where the vegetation is senescent. So the main contribution of this work is to expand the number of base models being compared and to expand the features that are being used to improve the performance of each of the models. Just to touch on the data that we're looking at, it's eddy covariance data from towers at each of the sites. So we have approximately 120 features, and I'll use the term feature interchangeably with variable. And in terms of data processing, we immediately discard any of the features with completeness less than 50%. And then we move on to our feature selection process, where we include 7 features with a known relationship with water flux and 4 temporal features. And then we conducted a correlation analysis with nighttime data. And then from there selected the top 10 and top 25 features that were common across all 4 sites. Briefly to go through the model selection process, I won't dive into the details due to time, but we compared 38 base regression models of different types, as you can see listed here. And then the metrics that we used to compare our models were adjusted R-squared, and RMSE. And I'll be using adjusted R-squared for the rest of the talk. So we feel it's the best measure of goodness of fit in this case, because it is independent of the number of features, which is important for comparing feature sets of different size. And it also isn't as vulnerable as RMSE to the assumptions about where transpiration may or may not be negligible on our validation sets. So I'll look at the results for 2 of the sites of the initial model comparison. Along the x-axis, you can see the adjusted R-squared for the holdout data for the nighttime set. So this is basically how well the models are performing on the data that they were trained on. And along the y-axis, we have the adjusted R-squared for the winter data, which is testing how well the models generalize to data that it hasn't seen. And for the Mayberry site, we see what we expect across the feature sets, that as you increase the number of features and increase the information given to the models, that performance increases. But we're looking for an optimal number of features where the models are reduced in complexity, but improved in performance. Interestingly enough, what we see across 3 of the sites is that ensemble methods generally perform best. But then as we look at the West Pond site, we see that the ensemble methods perform extremely well on the out of sample nighttime data, but do not generalize well to the winter or flooding data. And there are a number of reasons this could be. West Pond is the oldest of the 4 sites. It has a different vegetation composition. It also has a greater percentage of imputed data, and the overall ET signal is lower in magnitude. Then just to conclude, to touch on which models had the best overall performance. In terms of computational resource, the light GBM model performed extremely well, and this is important for scaling to multiple sites or looking at scaling to an entire ecosystem. The time taken here is the time to both train and test the model. And the light GBM model performed extremely well across all of the metrics across the 3 sites. But as I mentioned, linear models performed best on West Pond. And here I've just highlighted that which showed the highest metrics. And to conclude, just to mention that in our work, we will hopefully be further elucidating the feature set selection process and looking for the most parsimonious models possible. And I'll be taking any questions that anyone has in the chat. Thank you.